Thanks very much, Douglas. Tony.
It's quite interesting, really. I expected to be completely at odds with Douglas on this platform, but although I suspect I'll be much more scathing about some of the phenomena that have happened over the last 10 or 12 years, essentially our analysis isn't that far apart. I think it's really interesting that in Hans Andersen's Emperor's New Clothes, the person who identified that the emperor didn't have any clothes was a child. Because I suspect if it had been an adult, and let's update the metaphor a little bit and say that it was you and me and it wasn't an emperor, it was a Labour government, when the emperor stood up, I imagine that most of us wouldn't have said, oh, the emperor hasn't got any clothes on. We'd have said, oh, that's a process issue, not a politics issue. What I'm concerned about is jobs and houses. You don't hear anything about the emperor and his clothes on the doorstep. That's an issue for the chattering classes. What I'm concerned about is a Labour victory. Or else we might not have said anything at all. We might just have kept quiet, thinking to ourselves that if we say anything, we're going to get clobbered by the party machine who'll leak something about us to the press, and then we'll lose our influence and things will get even worse. And probably he's got a few clothes on, maybe he's got his pants on or something. It's just that someone's head's in the way and I haven't noticed. And I suffered exactly that kind of conflict throughout the 4 years that I was on the NEC. On one hand, I was really excited by the fact that we were able to implement the national minimum wage, that we were able to bring about the Scottish and Welsh Assembly, that we'd got all the additional money for health, that we'd implemented the Human Rights Act, that kind of thing. But on the other hand, it did seem to me that by and large, I was surrounded by a government which was about 6 people, 5 of whom weren't elected. We had a compliant cabinet, a compliant PLP. We had trade unions who were offered the promise of some kind of participation in the government, provided they kept their noses down and gave a lot of money, but actually at the end of the day all they got was promises. And we had constituency Labour parties, which were simply shells of constituency Labour parties undergoing purposeless rituals. And if that seems a little bit harsh, I don't think there was an experience that radicalised me in my adult life more than being on the NEC, which very few people are prepared to say. My conclusion was that we'd become steeped in a culture of political elitism, and that every major mistake that the party made, whether it was our failure to engage in debate over Iraq, whether it was the hijacking of the party's finances by political politicians and professional politicians, which led to Catch for Honours, whether it was our failure to deal with the democratic deficit in the House, which led to MPs' expenses, all of these were down to that same culture of political elitism. We are bright boys, we hold the reins of power, we can do what we want without consulting anyone else, including the members of the Labour Party. And I believe... And I believe that that culture needs to be replaced by a democratic vision. Now, of course, we need politicians, and we know that our politicians are likely to be very ambitious, very simple-minded, maybe a little bit tricky, present company accepted. But, you know, you do need those kind of skills amongst politicians. It's a tough old world. But that is only going to work provided they are surrounded by a rigid democratic programme. And to me, that is one of the essential functions of the Labour Party, or at least should be. I do think that the chair was right. The Crudas John Harris pamphlet a couple of years ago gave a very apposite look forward into what we can do in the short term to regenerate the Labour Party, that it should be properly funded, that we should have a national policy forum that has a direct relationship with the policy of the professional politicians, that we should have a meaningful conference, that kind of thing. But if we are going to have a change, maybe one of the first things we should ask is why such a change hasn't happened in the past. And if you think about the things over the last 100 years that have changed profoundly, think about the way our gas and electricity and other utilities are delivered. Think about how we receive and participate in knowledge compared with 100 years ago, how we engage with transport, how we're cured if we're ill. But if you look then at the Labour Party, it's virtually the same. It's the same shape, it's the same organisation, and while I accept absolutely Douglas's point about its origins, the same issues are discussed, it's the same factions as 100 years ago. Only the names have been changed to protect the innocent. We've still got the statists and the anti-statists and the social democrats and the free marketeers and the communitarians and the pacifists and the Christians and the trade unions. It's hardly any wonder that a lot of the time people think actually stasis is much easier. It's much safer, because if we do try to change, if anyone moves a single inch, some other faction is going to kick off. But I don't believe that that kind of tense stasis can hold together anymore. That tense stasis which is held together simply by number 10 and a party machine which can be ruthlessly efficient, although if you've been on the NEC you'll know that sometimes it can be ruthlessly inefficient. And it is also dreadfully scary if you get close to it. And also it works by and large at the behest, not for the party as a whole, but for the political leadership. I don't think that will hold. I think the Labour Party has become a kind of nightmare Gramscian Mary Celeste, sailing through the Bermuda Triangle, thinking it's the greatest ship in the world while nobody else notices it and gets on with their own lives. And I'll give you, as an example of that, the National Policy Forum. What a bloody waste of time. And I say that not as an opponent of the National Policy Forum. I believed in the National Policy Forum. I was the chair of a policy commission. I was on the JPC for a number of years, and I have reluctantly come to the conclusion that it's a ritual whose sole function is to make sure people don't use their energies in other directions and kick off. I believe we need to regenerate the party, as the other speakers have said, and I would cite 3 basic principles: education, engagement, and ethics. One of the previous General Secretaries, David Treisman, suggested that what we needed was a university of the Labour Party. I think that's probably much too high flown, but I certainly do think that we need to use the party much more for us all to develop leadership skills, to develop organisational skills, to develop our political understanding. We need engagement, and Sam, I think, in the last session was very good about this. Any radical party worth its salt gets stuck into the community, not in an exclusive way, not in some vanguardist way that we're getting into the community because we want to get more people for the Labour Party, but because real politics is local politics. Real politics is the community, and that's where we should be. And finally, I believe that we should renew the possibility of a genuinely ethical strand within the Labour Party. From Aristotle onwards, decent politicians have said that good parties start with the individual and with the conduct of the individual. And that means trusting, encouraging, and empowering people, not controlling them. And what it doesn't mean is simply talking the talk about empowerment and this great party, a phrase I've heard an awful lot over the last 10 years, but then returning to the old habits as soon as the party's back is turned. I believe that now is the time for change, and I do welcome Compass's contribution to it. And of course, we need to be disciplined, and of course, we need to be loyal. But this is our party, not the party of the latest leadership fad.